Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today we'll talk about Egyptian mummies in popular culture. Do mummies wait inside the pyramids in their cursed sleep? Why did they become so popular? And how do we see them in modern films and computer games? Unlike many other mythical creatures, the mummy is rather young, no matter how paradoxical it may seem. Ancient and medieval legends have no monsters wrapped in bandages, unlike ghouls, werewolves, or basilisks. Mummies were not mentioned on the pages of bestiaries or ancient tales. Perhaps they did not impress the creators of ancient encyclopedias. Perhaps they have been hidden under the sands of time for too long. However, the mummies gained enormous popularity in the 19th and 20th centuries in the wake of the craze for Egyptology. Napoleon's first expedition to Egypt in 1798 piqued European curiosity and allowed 19th century travelers to bring whole mummies from Egypt to Europe and America. At that time, mummies were not a source of awe or even respect. They could be purchased from street vendors to be used as attractions for private and public events. The British elite often held receptions where the main theme was the unwrapping of the mummy in front of a curious audience. By the mid-19th century, mummies had become valuable artifacts, and many were purchased as souvenirs by wealthy European and American collectors. For those who could not afford a whole mummy, scattered remains were offered on the black market, such as heads, arms, or legs. Londoners flocked to see the mummified bodies of ancient Egyptians. But during the 19th century, in addition to interest in Egypt, there was interest in occultism, mysticism, and the secrets of the East. That is how the mystery of the mummies was invented. Oriental tales set in Cairo, Luxor, or Karnak were combined with classical English literature. In 1827, the first novel by the English writer Jane Wells Webb, one of the inventors of science fiction, was published. The novel, Mummy, or the History of the 22nd Century, tells how the mummy of Pharaoh Cheops comes to life with the help of galvanization and makes his way among the people of the distant future. Edgar Allan Poe's 1845 short story, A Conversation with the Mummy, provides another early example of literature about the reanimation of the ancients. The mummy in the opened sarcophagus turned out to be not dead, but immersed in deep sleep. With the help of electricity, it awakens to life. At the end of the work, the narrator asks his friends to embalm him in the same way as the mummy. In the 1860s, there appeared a genre of classical ghost stories. Victorian haunted houses, the souls of restless villains and victims, were creatively combined with Egyptian artifacts that filled the mansions of the British nobility. In The Story of Balbro Manor, an English ghost inhabits the body of a mummy brought by the owner of the house from Egypt and attacks the inhabitants to drink their blood. Arthur Conan Doyle, a well-known fan of mysticism, also did not stay away from this topic. In his story number 2, Fornine, an occult student brings to life a mummy he bought, and it wanders around the building, scaring people around. In Bram Stoker's 1903 novel, The Jewel of the Seven Stars, a vengeful spirit in a long-lost tomb kills all who disturb it. The first movie about mummies, Cleopatra's Tomb, was made in 1899. The film, now lost, reportedly told the story of Cleopatra's mummy, which was discovered, chopped into pieces, and then resurrected to wreak havoc on the living. In 1911, The Mummy movie was released, in which the mummy of an Egyptian princess is brought to life with the help of electric currents, and in the end, the scientist who brought her back marries her. In general, romantic lines often slip in. Stories about reanimated mummies written in the early 20th century concerned mainly female mummies, and they were portrayed as mysterious, sensual, and seductive, taking on the appearance of the beautiful concubines of the pharaohs. Unlike vampires, succubi, and other demonic creatures who sought to drain the life energy from mortals, mummies were much more human-like, capable of love and real relationships with human men. For example, the story The Judgment of the Pharaohs by Henry Rider Haggard, 1913. After seeing a bust of the ancient Egyptian queen Mummy in the British Museum, student Smith falls in love with her. He studies Egyptology and goes in search of the tomb of the one he fell in love with. When he manages to find the queen's mummy, she comes to life at night in the museum and returns the love of her savior. The main character, in turn, turns out to be the reincarnation of her lover. In 1922, the tomb of Tutankhamun was excavated and opened. By this time, scary tales of vengeful mummies and ancient Egyptian curses had already become part of popular Orientalist folklore. Tutankhamun himself was a pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom. His reign was not particularly remarkable. He died at the age of 19, after 10 years of rule, so most likely the regents made decisions for him most of the time. However, the news of the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb spread throughout the world because the tomb of the pharaoh turned out to be practically intact. Several people who participated in the excavation of the tomb died within several years under mysterious circumstances. This made Tutankhamun even more famous in popular culture and inspired stories about the curse of the pharaohs. Newspaper articles claimed that Tutankhamun's sarcophagus was covered with hieroglyphs that spelled out a curse. Death will quickly follow those who disturb the eternal sleep of the pharaoh. In fact, nothing like this was written anywhere in the tomb. In total, the number of alleged victims of the curse varies from 20 to 35. The average age of the deceased is 70 years. The 1932 film The Mummy completes the classic quartet of Universal horror films released in the 1930s. The Mummy is the most famous film villain of Hollywood's so-called golden age of horror, along with Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolf Man. The main role in the film was played by actor Boris Karloff. He plays Imhotep, an ancient priest who was buried alive and resurrected in the 20th century. He seeks to kill the beautiful Helen, the reincarnation of his beloved. He plans to mummify and then resurrect the girl. Of course, these plans will be thwarted and Imhotep himself will be scattered to dust. The huge box office success of this film guaranteed sequels that were released throughout the 1940s. And this is how the image of the mummy was formed in popular culture. A cursed undead figure wrapped in bandages rises from the sarcophagus, surrounded by mysterious hieroglyphs and artifacts. Slowly and clumsily, the mummy moves forward, often holding out its arms with rags of windings. The revived pharaoh doesn't care whether he attacks real grave robbers or archaeologists who want to put him in a museum. He just knows that they are desecrating his grave. Sometimes he may announce his arrival with the words, "Who dares disturb my sleep?" Mummies in culture most often live in pyramids. But those are the symbols of different epochs. In the times when the pyramids were constructed, the art of embalming the dead was just emerging. It took 1,000 years to perfect mummification, and most classical mummies were buried in rock tombs, not pyramids. Also, the ancient builders did not create any special traps or labyrinths. At most, they sealed the entrance to the burial place, but when the first archaeologists descended into the excavated burials, they often found them ruined, which created a feeling of danger and obstacles. That is why movies and books tell us about the pyramids as some kind of temple of doom, an obstacle path for a brave archaeologist. As a rule, pyramids in films and computer games are much larger inside than real burials. In the series of Lara Croft games, one can go down the elevator, jump into shafts, and climb intricate stairs inside the tomb of the pharaohs, and the sarcophagi with mummies are placed at every step. Interest in mummies was revived by the 1999 remake of The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser. The film became as popular as the 1932 original, and was followed by 2 more sequels. But the second reboot, with Tom Cruise, was unsuccessful. We can argue that mass culture influenced modern and ancient Egypt. On the one hand, lots of cultural artifacts were taken away from the country. It seems that there are more obelisks and sarcophagi around the world than are left in the museums of Cairo. On the other hand, the archaeologists themselves insisted that they were saving and preserving ancient values. Of course, the image of the pharaohs, pyramids, and Queen Cleopatra has overshadowed historical facts. Even today, many people are sure that modern-day Egyptians still embalm their dead and worship the god Thoth. But as we see, for 200 years, mummies have felt quite comfortable as a part of European culture and not just Middle Eastern culture. In many fantasy worlds, they are no longer connected in any way with ancient Egypt, but exist on their own as warriors and sorcerers animated by magic. Do you like mummies? Write it in the comments. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching.